what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to what if the USA stopped existing. It's from the infographics. So I mean, I don't know, I feel like they're US based, right? So they're always like locked in and tapped into stuff to do with the US. But in terms of the US didn't exist, I guess this is just like a made up concept of like global affairs that they're involved in that they just wouldn't be involved in, and I guess the regions around them. Is it going to be going into if the US didn't exist in terms of the land wouldn't be here, or just the US as a country? I guess we'll see throughout this video, but yeah, we're going to check this out. I always find these videos quite interesting. Like, obviously they're not realistic, but it sort of goes to show, I guess, the influence a certain country or a certain group of people or whatever it is, whatever the video is on, like the influence that they have, right? But yeah, we're going to check this out. Also, if I look very pale, my lights are bugging out today, so I've just had to set them up, and they automatically go on the brightest or one of the brightest settings, so they are blinding me when I look at them. So yeah, if I look a bit pale, I am pale, so that's probably part of it, but they're not helping. The lights are not helping. But yeah, we're going to check this out and see what if the USA stopped existing.
It has just disappeared. The land gone. Its people vanished into thin air. No one knows how or why it happened, but one thing is certain: everything the USA stood for, its power, its culture, its people, is gone forever. What happens next? The global economy is plunged into chaos. Markets are crashing, industries are collapsing, and nations are scrambling to fill the void. But that's just the beginning.
China will be very happy. China and Russia, and you might throw like what? Iran in there and stuff. Yeah, they're going to be very happy countries.
America's disappearance triggers a domino effect, unraveling the global order. Devastation spreads, but so does unexpected opportunities. Could this lead to a new world order, or is it the start of total collapse? We'll explain what would really happen, the good and the bad,
Communism
on today's episode of the Infographic Show.
All of
what
Europe.
if the USA stopped existing?
I guarantee.
1 minute after the US disappears. Nobody is quite sure what's going on just yet. Both Mexico and Canada are scratching their heads. The enormous land.
Okay, this is literally going into if the US like completely just disappeared, the land. I want to look at like what the world will actually feel, not just how Canadians or Mexicans, like what they're going to think when the USA just disappears. For fuck's sake.
The landmass that used to sit between them has simply vanished. And while the shock is still settling in, the effects of America's sudden disappearance are starting to make themselves known. Canada finds itself with a brand new southern coast stretching for over 5,500 miles and a whole lot of beachfront properties. Meanwhile, Alaska is also gone, changing the shape of the country for good. Mexico also gained a new northern coast, albeit one that's a little shorter, at around 1,900 miles. Still, that's a lot of brand new coastline, and most of these towns and cities weren't exactly built with ocean waves in mind. Adjusting to life by the sea might take some time and a whole lot of planning. The disappearance of such a massive landmass is also sure to affect ocean currents. The Gulf Stream, which flows out of the Gulf of Mexico and around the tip of Florida, would likely change course entirely. That shift could spell trouble for the future, as this critical current plays a key role in carrying zooplankton across the North Atlantic and toward Europe, supporting marine life and ecosystems all along the way. All of that is gone now, with the sea that used to be the United States likely leading to current diversions. 10 minutes after the US disappears. The news is already spreading like wildfire, and assuming you're not one of the nearly 340...
Bro, get into the politics, man. I don't care about the country's reactions to the US just disappearing.
6 million Americans who just vanished. You've probably started hearing about what just happened. Social media is ablaze with speculation, and every TV station is scrambling to make sense of it all. Speaking of TV,
what have I got myself
the coming
into?
weeks will reveal just how deeply America's disappearance will affect the rest of the world. Not just economically, but culturally too. From the absence of Hollywood blockbusters to the void left in music, fashion, and entertainment, the cultural ripple effects are only just beginning. The effects are immediate in the world of streaming services. Netflix, for example, operates over 4,600 servers in 243 locations as part of its content delivery network, with the majority of those servers located in the United States. This concentration means that Netflix is likely to go offline entirely. Additionally, the platform's code relies heavily on Amazon Web Services, or AWS, a US-based company. With over 100,000 server instances on AWS, the system is likely to collapse under its own weight, even if leadership outside of the US attempts to stabilize operations. Recovery might be possible under new leadership in another country, but Netflix's collapse represents a broader trend. Other major platforms like Disney+, HBO Max, and Amazon Prime also disappear.
Bro, no shit. Is it just gonna be? Okay, he's got Odoo. Okay, they've got an ad. All right, I think that it will get into juicy stuff at some point. I guess it's just setting the scene, right? But come on, man, I don't give a shit about Netflix.
Global streaming landscape so heavily reliant on U.S. infrastructure no longer.
I guess this what this is showing is just the U.S. just like how the U.S. even just like what he's talking about streaming and all stuff like that, right? It's so important for these things, day-to-day things that people use and don't really think about. So I guess it is sort of showing that, but I don't care about HBO Max.
Longer functions as it does today. And don't forget about social media. Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn are all American companies. Their leadership has just been decimated, and they're likely to disappear for the same reasons as the streaming services.
What, Twitter?
The point is,
or
almost
X?
everything we know about the internet as it works
YouTube.
today is going to collapse 30 minutes after the US disappears. It's really starting to sink in now, as people all around the world watch the news and see all of those platforms collapsing in on themselves. On the cultural side, the world has just lost Hollywood and America's massive movie industry. In 2023 alone, the US produced over 1,200 films, accounting for around
Okay, so I think this is just going into like what the US like does basically for the world. I sort of understand what this video is focusing on now.
2/3 of all films released publicly during the year. The numbers aren't.
Wait, what was the number?
Accounting for around 2/3 of all films released publicly during the year. The numbers aren't too far different for
That's crazy.
2024, and there were around 220 films in production and slated for release in 2025. That entire movie-making industry is gone, along with all of the celebrities that millions of people around the world love. The same goes for American TV. There will be
No,
no
the
more episodes of
Kardashians.
Keeping Up with the
No.
Kardashians, which may or may not be a bad thing. So what about Amazon? Sure, Prime is in chaos, but there's also the Amazon platform itself. There are supposedly 9.7 million people and businesses registered as sellers on that platform, with 2 million of those active. In fact, independent sales from third parties account for about 60% of Amazon's total sales. Have you ever wanted to build your own website but felt overwhelmed by the cost, complexity, or time commitment?
No,
Well,
not
you
really.
can forget those words. Your customer, one who's expecting platform's existence to make a living, or you're a customer, one who's expecting deliveries and uses Amazon to do most of your online shopping. Not anymore, or at least not for a good while. The entire business is going to have to rebuild and restructure itself, leaving millions of sellers struggling to make ends meet. And it's not just Amazon. The likes of Shopify, which is also a US company, will also be struggling. That platform has 2 million merchants.
What is Shopify? I've heard of Shopify. What is Shopify? Do people even use that?
And those who haven't disappeared with the US are likely panicking as it collapses. Etsy follows suit, and Facebook Marketplace is also expected to go offline, at least until the non-US teams behind those platforms can regain control. There will be weeks of chaos, impacting millions of small business owners and consumers around the globe. But that's just the start of the economic problems America's Disappearing Act will cause. 1 hour after the US disappears, the world's financial markets are in complete disarray, and the situation only worsens from there. But the most immediate problem is the disappearance of the dollar. Physical dollars might still exist outside of the US, but without a country to back them, they're now completely worthless. This is a major problem. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. The reserve currency refers to a large stockpile of a particular currency that central banks and financial institutions hold to facilitate international transactions and investments. Simply put, the dollar serves as the world's primary trading currency. Almost every globally traded commodity, especially oil, gas, and other key products, is priced in dollars. The world's entire financial system depends on this currency, which now exists only in physical form and is no longer backed by a functioning nation. This poses a massive problem. By the end of 2023, banks and financial institutions worldwide held approximately $12 trillion in foreign exchange reserves. By far, the highest volumes of those reserves were in US dollars. Almost 7 trillion of the 12 trillion held. With the dollar now worthless, that $7 trillion has been wiped out, leaving banks, investors, and anyone involved in the global financial system scrambling in panic. Take the chaos in global trade as an example. In 2019, the dollar was involved in 96% of international trade transactions within the Americas, 74% in Asia, and 79% of international transactions worldwide. Additionally, banks relied on the dollar for around 60% of their international loans and deposits. Without the dollar, the entire framework of global trade and banking is thrown into disarray. The point here is that a lot of countries' central banks are going to see their entire reserves go up in smoke. Over the next few months, the world will switch to a new reserve currency, like the pound, euro, or a similar
The pound? Come on, we're
strong
back.
currency.
We are so back.
Cryptocurrencies might even start to play a bigger role in society as financial institutions grow cautious of traditional currencies,
Bitcoin.
given the newfound uncertainty that
I mean, that's already doing it now with the US here, isn't it? Isn't like, I don't really know, but isn't like the new, like Trump's new, like, I don't know, his party or whatever, are they not like trying to do something with Bitcoin or something like that? I feel like they are, but I don't fully know what.
entire nations could vanish. But the loss of the dollar is going to rock the financial world in ways we cannot really anticipate. 5 days after the US disappears, the American Stock Exchange is no more. Wall Street has vanished. Every financial system the US established to drive international investment has also disappeared, along with
These
the
lights are blinding my eyes, bro. Fucking hell.
majority of companies offering stocks and shares. Also gone is the capital the U.S. was investing overseas, a lifeline for countless companies outside of America. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, America's direct investments abroad reached a staggering $6.6 trillion by the end of 2023.
Jesus.
Overseas investments into the United States weren't far behind, totaling $5.3 trillion during the same period. All of that capital has now vanished, leaving a massive void in the global economy. Companies and organizations that relied on the U.S. funding have lost their financial lifeline. Any physical dollars they now hold are worthless, and digital records of their accounts are effectively erased. Foreign investors, ranging from individuals who purchased American stocks to entire nations investing in U.S. securities, suddenly find themselves significantly poorer. It's impossible to overstate the fact that the dollar is the cornerstone of the entire international monetary system. With it gone, the whole world is going to be a lot poorer simply because there is no precedent for a currency disappearing. Would it even be possible to fix the problem? Or would the investors, banks, and financial institutions that relied on the dollar have to find some way to simply reset and start from zero? The last few days have been a nightmare for the world monetarily, but there will be a little hint of hope that emerges in the coming weeks. 2 weeks after the U.S. disappears, rescue efforts have been swift, with ships streaming into the vast new sea where America once stood, searching for survivors, but there are none. There is no sign of what actually happened either. The U.S. didn't sink beneath the waves, there's simply no trace of it at all. All that remains is an expanse of water where the country used to be. After a few weeks of vain searching, the world finally accepts America is just gone. Some nations are already looking to the future. The sudden transformation of the U.S. into a sea could offer unexpected benefits for global trade. This new expanse of water creates a wider and potentially safer passage for cargo ships moving through the Americas. Before the U.S. disappeared, ships navigating the Americas had only two main options, neither of which were ideal. Heading north above Canada meant confronting ice and freezing conditions that could bring vessels to a standstill. The southern route around Cape Horn and through the Drake Passage was no better. This 403-mile-wide strait is notorious as one of the most dangerous waterways in the world. The region is relentlessly battered by fierce winds, which often escalate into full-blown storms, with hurricane conditions occurring several days each month. Cape Horn has earned its grim reputation as the world's largest ship graveyard, with over 800 vessels and 10,000 sailors and passengers lost to its treacherous waters. Is it any wonder then that the world collectively decided to take a third option that allowed ships to pass through the Americas rather than around them? Enter the Panama Canal. In 2022 alone, over 14,000 ships passed through the canal. Similar numbers have been recorded annually, with more than 13,000 ships using it every year between 2014 and 2021. In total, around 22% of the world's seaborne cargo moves through the canal, carrying everything from oil and gas to consumer goods and raw materials. But with the U.S. now replaced by open water, the Panama Canal is no longer necessary. A massive new waterway has opened up that is far safer than either tip of the Americas and capable of accommodating far more ships simultaneously than the Panama Canal ever could. Spanning over 3.7 million square miles where the U.S. once stood, this new sea renders the Panama Canal effectively redundant. This development is a game changer for global trade. Ships can now move between the Indo-Pacific and the Atlantic regions with unprecedented ease, without the bottleneck of a canal where vessels must pass through one at a time. Transit times improve dramatically, offering a faster, more efficient route for maritime commerce. 1 month after the U.S. disappears.
Okay, so we're getting into time frames that are like quite spread apart now. 1 month's a good amount of time.
While the ability to bypass the Panama Canal could, in theory, boost the speed and the volume of global seaborne trade, companies worldwide face a significant problem. They have lost one of their largest trading partners. The United States was the world's second largest trading nation, with over $7 trillion
Behind China,
of imports
I guess?
and exports passing through the country in 2022 alone. According to the Office of the United States Trade Representative, the country has trade relationships with over 200 countries and territories that rely on the U.S. to provide or buy products. As an exporter, the U.S. ranked just behind China in 2022, selling $2.1 trillion worth of goods globally. This trade was on the rise, increasing by $307 billion between 2021 and 2022. The sudden halt in U.S. exports will leave a significant void in global markets. Canada and Mexico relied heavily on U.S. goods, each importing over $300 billion annually before the country vanished. Other major trading partners like Japan and the UK also spent tens of billions on American exports. The ripple effects of this lost trade will be felt worldwide. A lot of those countries are going to have to find new trading partners, which could spell good news for energy-rich nations like Saudi Arabia. According to the Observatory of Economic Complexity, petroleum products were among the United States' top exports. It sold $138 billion in refined petroleum, $118 billion in crude petroleum, and $116 billion in petroleum gas annually. Or at least it did. With the U.S. gone, all of these oil-based products are permanently off the market. Canada and Mexico.
Yeah, but surely they're going to be in the oceans, and now it's a free for all to get it. So then Mexico or Canada can start selling it. No, I mean, I'm sure the oil's still going to be there, unless the oil's gone as well.
Mexico might try to control any remaining offshore oil
There you go.
reserves, but the rest of the world will be forced to source its petroleum products elsewhere, driving up competition and prices in global energy markets. On the importing side of things, the U.S. was the world's largest importer of goods. It spent $3.2 trillion on products in 2022, with China being its top supplier. China is trying to absorb the massive economic hit that comes with losing the $536 billion per year that the U.S. spent on its products. It'll figure it out. Tech is going to be a big earner for China in a world that has lost the U.S., but the country will spend several years struggling to fill a $500 billion gap in its economy. We can't forget services either. The U.S. exported $926 billion in services in 2022. Think everything from web development to providing cloud computing facilities. It also purchased $680 billion of services from other countries, with the UK being the largest service provider.
Come
Britain will
on.
lose around $70 billion in income per year thanks to America's disappearance.
Shit.
All of this adds to the financial chaos already caused by the loss of the dollar and the disappearance of countless massive companies. For those fortunate enough not to have been in the U.S. when it vanished, the effects will soon become apparent, most notably in rising prices. With one of the world's largest exporters gone, the supply of petroleum, cars, and countless other products has drastically diminished. And the basic law of supply and demand dictates when supply drops and demand remains high, prices inevitably rise. Then there's the tech industry. For the 1.3 billion iPhone users worldwide, the current iPhone series will likely be the last Apple smartphone ever made. And while this might be great news for Samsung, even it will face challenges. Android, the operating system it relies on, was maintained by the now struggling Google, leaving tech markets in further disarray. 6 months after the U.S. disappears, China is poised to take a massive trade hit following the disappearance of the U.S. However, there's a silver lining for Beijing. Without the U.S. in the picture, China has a unique opportunity to cement itself as the global leader in technology. Before its vanishing act, the U.S. ranked as the world's third most innovative nation by income. China, meanwhile, sat in 11th place globally and third in the Indo-Pacific region. What's notable about these rankings is that 8 of the top 11 nations are NATO members, long reliant on U.S. military support to ensure their geopolitical stability. While China might not resort to outright aggression, it stands to gain significant leverage. As a wealthy and powerful nation, it can use intimidation and economic pressure to influence smaller countries and align them with its agenda. The other 2 top innovators, Singapore and South Korea, may also find themselves under pressure to cooperate with China, particularly now that the U.S. is no longer available to provide a security umbrella or counterbalance Beijing's growing dominance. There will be an interesting period that follows on the technology front. If a technology war broke out, China would be the natural country to fill the tech vacuum. Though it's possible we could see an alliance form between other international tech leaders to counteract Beijing's growing influence. Europe, Japan, and Southeast Asian nations who have a greater incentive to join forces and challenge China's dominance. This alliance could create a new dynamic in global technology leadership, potentially reshaping the balance of power in an increasingly digital world. But it's important to acknowledge the role Taiwan could play in this new tech race. While not one of the world's most innovative territories, Taiwan is its biggest producer of semiconductors. It manufactures 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors and around 60% of the global stock overall. These little chips power millions of products, from smartphones to advanced weapon systems, and in the wake of America's disappearance, control over Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing base would be a game changer for any nation seeking
China are taking control, right?
to dominate the global technology landscape. But it's not all good news for the island nation. America played a crucial role in deterring China from invading Taiwan, largely through the sale of advanced weapon systems. Now those weapons aren't coming, nor will Taiwan be able to secure any future purchases to defend itself against China's unwanted advances. Without American support, Taiwan's ability to resist external pressure becomes far more uncertain. So almost inevitably, the
They're
loss of
cooked.
the U.S.
They
means
are
we're going to
cooked.
see war erupt in the Indo-Pacific. Taiwan will face massive missile assaults from China and is likely to eventually be overrun as Beijing looks to take control over the country's semiconductor production to establish itself as the world's tech leader. China wouldn't become the world's tech superpower because it's the most innovative nation in the world. It'll manage it through the conquest of Taiwan and the world's increasing reliance on its ability to build cheap products with the U.S. out of the picture. Sure, the likes of Japan and South Korea will have plenty to say about Beijing's aggressive approach in the Indo-Pacific, but they won't be able to do much about it. China has around 500 nuclear weapons, with the other major nations in the region having a total of 0. Risking war with China over Taiwan means potential nuclear
Wait, South Korea have no nuclear weapons? That's pretty mad when they're bordering North Korea.
annihilation now that the U.S. isn't around to keep the peace with its own nuclear arsenal. 1 year after the U.S. disappears. With the
Long
U.S.
time.
no longer a competitor, countries like those in the Middle East are seeing record demand for oil and natural gas. Major importers such as Mexico, South Korea, the Netherlands, the UK, and Canada are now looking for new suppliers, driving up the global influence of energy-producing nations. The absence of the U.S. has also created a power vacuum in the realm of nuclear capabilities. Before its disappearance, the United States maintained one of the largest nuclear arsenals, with over 5,700 warheads.
I mean, those nukes are still there technically, if you know the land's just sort of sunk. So there's still a cause for concern, I guess, because they could explode at any point.
This capability played a crucial role in deterring aggression and balancing global power dynamics. While countries like China, with its 500 warheads, remain significant, there's now an undeniable gap in nuclear deterrence that leaves Europe and other regions more exposed. For Europe, the loss of American military support is particularly stark.
Cooked.
NATO, which had 32 members before the US vanished, remains intact, but is far less of a collective threat without its strongest member. Only France and the UK possess nuclear weapons, with stockpiles of 290 and 225 warheads respectively.
Where are we holding this 225 warheads, by the way? Because it's such a small country, and you've got 225. Like, come on.
While these would be devastating in a conflict, they pale in comparison to the combined nuclear capabilities of other global powers. To adapt, NATO might explore expanding its membership beyond Europe and North America, potentially inviting countries like India, Japan, and South Korea to join. India, with its 172 nuclear weapons, could bolster NATO's deterrence efforts. However, even with such additions, NATO faces a steep uphill battle to fill the void left by the US. Meanwhile, European nations are likely to ramp up investments in their own defense industries. Many NATO members previously sourced a significant portion of their weapons from US manufacturers. And with those suppliers gone, countries like Germany and Poland may seek to build their own military capabilities. There's even the possibility of increased nuclear collaboration among European nations, with countries like Britain and France sharing their expertise to strengthen the continent's overall defense. The geopolitical landscape is also shifting in Asia, where nations like South Korea and Japan are grappling with new security challenges. Similarly, countries that relied on America's military presence for regional stability now face a more uncertain future. The next few years are likely to see heightened tensions and significant conflict, not necessarily through outright invasions, but through increasing leverage and influence by dominant powers. Smaller nations may be pressured into concessions or alliances that reshape the global balance of power. Without the US acting as a stabilizing force, the international community is left to navigate a new and far more precarious world order. 5 years after the US
That's a long
disappears,
time.
the world is still in recovery mode. Though trade and global economies are on the mend, the euro is established as the new reserve currency, though how long that'll last is anybody's guess. But there's at least some semblance of stability in a world that feels very different from what it did 5 years before. And as devastating as losing the US was, one bright spot is that the country's disappearance has led to good things for the environment.
We
While
are so
climate
back.
change remains a significant challenge, the 2024 State of Carbon Dioxide Removal Report highlights the scale of action needed. Globally, CO2 emissions must be reduced by 7 to 9 billion tons annually to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target outlined in the Paris Agreement. The nations that committed to this agreement before the US disappeared remain steadfast in their efforts to combat climate change. Still, the absence of the US does bring the world slightly closer to achieving those ambitious CO2 reduction goals. America produced approximately 6.3 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents in 2022. That figure is close to the annual reduction target outlined in the State of Carbon Dioxide Removal Report. And with the US gone, the world is already beginning to see some environmental benefits. Now the remaining signatories of the Paris Agreement only need to collectively reduce emissions by 1.4 to 3.6 billion tons, a challenging but more achievable goal. However, the climate challenge is far from solved. The loss of America's innovators could hinder progress in developing future solutions to further reduce emissions. Still, there is no denying that the absence of the US represents a significant step forward for the planet's environmental goals. Yet it comes with a heavy cost. Over 345 million fewer people in the world to see the benefits.
Damn.
Hundreds of years after the US disappears.
Hundreds of years.
The world, as it always does, has moved on from America's disappearance. It had no choice. Predicting which nations have risen or fallen in the centuries since is impossible, though it's safe to assume that powers like China and others likely enjoyed periods of dominance. But what about the country that vanished? What place would it hold in the world's memory so many centuries later? Perhaps the United States would share the same fate as the massive chunk of Northwest Australia believed to have vanished around 155 million years ago. For
What?
decades, scientists have puzzled
Damn.
over the disappearance of this 3,000-mile landmass. Did it sink into the ocean, fuse with another landmass, or did it even exist at all? Centuries after the US vanished, similar questions might occupy the minds of future scientists, though not likely the last one. Unlike ancient mysteries, America's existence would never be forgotten. The modern world leaves far too many traces of its influence, ensuring that humanity would always know it once was. The questions would instead focus on what happened to it, and perhaps one day those questions might finally be answered. But what do you think would happen to the rest of the world if the United States disappeared one day? Which countries would try to take over as the dominant nation? Let us
China.
know in the comments, and thank
China
you
are coming to claim everything. Shopify is a Canadian company. Oh god, so it's not even an American company. You forgot about the US. US is 200 plus military bases abroad. Yep. A better video would have been what if all countries simply ignored and had nothing to do with the US. You want a goal for America? Well, there you go. Canadian here. This is an interesting possibility. I mean, look, it's never gonna happen. But I guess this video, what it did show us all the things that the US is like, not capable, sorry. All the things that the US has sort of like created for the world and all this sort of stuff. Like the start, I was sort of laughing at the start because it was just a bit funny how they put it together. But like streaming services, like phones, all these different things that they have an influence on would be affected, whether they're gone or just not usable, whatever. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this reaction. Let me know your thoughts on this. And until next time, like, subscribe, and peace.